Greetings, welcome to KIN236 Chapter 8. This is the second portion of our video presentation on the slides. We left off with this gentleman patiently waiting on his golf swing. Now let's go ahead and follow through and pay attention to the hips. And he's hanging, we're checking out his swing. Okay, the hips look pretty good there. And he's going to follow through, the hips lead. Notice now the ball makes contact. And so with this, what I'm after is making sure you guys understand that there's a segmentation of a golf swing, and it's replicated here in this type of exercise as you anchor the feet, anchor the hands against resistance on a dual action pulley, and you rotate the hips. It's the hips that lead the charge, the rest of the body, the torso, the upper torso will follow, and the club head will follow. Pay attention to this left hip. Club head is still going back. Still going back. The hip now comes forward as the club head now starts to whip through. It all starts with this, which equates down to this. So going back to this, just realize this is a good representation of a whole part, whole example to work on right and left pelvic rotation in transverse plane. Zipping through this, I just want to go through these 7 2 joint muscles. They're broken down into different regions: anterior, posterior, medial, and lateral. But the 7 are rectus femoris, sartorius, gracilis, semitendinosus, semimembranosus, biceps femoris, tensor fasciae latae. And when you look at these, just kind of take a look at how you have rectus femoris, hip flexion, knee extension. That's a 2 joint muscle. The other muscles that are part of the quadricep group are not, and they only perform knee extension. That sounds a lot like a test question. You have semitendinosus, semimembranosus. Those are part of the hamstring group with biceps femoris. And notice, they're antagonistic to rectus femoris. Okay, got it. So that one would be on the anterior side, one would be on the posterior side, which is something I'm sure you guys already know. I want to point that out. What I did is I took the pictures from provided by the book, and I broke these out for you. Now realize some of them, the musculature is deep compared to the others, and so as a result, it's not represented in some of the pictures. But in this example, you have iliopsoas, pectineus, rectus femoris, and sartorius. So sartorius is cut away here. Rectus femoris runs down the front leg, that's also cut, runs down, attaches to the patellar tendon down here, causes knee flexion as well as hip flexion. Iliopsoas is actually a combination of two muscles that come together. Okay, iliacus and psoas minor and psoas major. These are usually referred to as just psoas, but you have psoas minor, psoas major come together with iliacus to attach to the femur to cause hip flexion. And what I want to point out here is, notice psoas are the only true hip flexors that originate on the spine. Notice that, because here's the deal. When I mentioned all my cyclists who go out and they do all these cycle classes, they're in hip flexion because they're bent over on their bike. They're doing hip flexion, hip flexion, hip flexion, hip flexion 1,000 times in 1 hour for a class. They are drawing on this musculature to do hip flexion over and over and over and over again. And you often see them walk out of cycle class waddling around like a duck because these are just so damn tight. So here's my point to you. When people say you need to have a strong core, they're not joking around, because so often in activities that are athletically based, you have to use the hip flexors to be able to pull the knee up to go into a high knee position in sprinting and running. And part of that falls right here to psoas minor and major. And these guys get overworked and they are anchored on the spine. So every time you lift your leg, if the rest of the musculature is not strong, you are yanking on the front part, kind of lateral aspect, ipsilateral kind of aspect of that spine as it's pulling forward with hip flexion. Got it? And then pectineus, another muscle on the front for hip flexion. So as we go through this, notice I'm going to change the color here so you can kind of keep track of it. And this is a good example of how you have brevis longus magnus, right? So you have adductor longus, adductor magnus, right? It kind of runs runs deep, and then you have adductor magnus that runs deep to gracilis. What you don't see here is brevis, and it's just you can't see it in this rendering. If we go ahead and go to the mean green for glutes, You have glute max, right? Then you have biceps femoris, long head, short head biceps femoris, semitendinosus, semimembranosus. And the rotators are deep up here to the glutes. And one thing, I remember I had a massage from this one lady who just had started doing massage therapy, and she was working on my hamstrings. And I couldn't tell. I'm like, holy cow, are you working more like semimembranosus or semitendinosus? She goes, well, I don't know. I can't tell the difference. I'm thinking, well, you probably don't need to be a massage therapist then. I don't need to have you working on me ever again. So the way to remember this, right, this is a posterior view because here's the glute, and you know if they're showing a rendering on the right side of your screen, because it's the right leg, it's going to be the posterior side of the body. And you know, with this, you have semimembranosus. The way they show it, part of it is medial to semitendinosus. So part of semimembranosus, membranosus M, medial, to semitendinosus. Got it? Medial side of the body, more lateral. It's not exact, I'm sorry, because actually semimembranosus comes down partially inside, but you have a good chunk of it that's on the medial side of the leg. That's how I remembered it. Hope it helps you. Going to the purple here, we got glute med. Now notice how glute med is represented here in a lateral shot of the leg, and TFL, tensor fasciae latae. Tensor fasciae latae runs down the lateral aspect of the leg and ties into the IT band and the iliotibial tract. Again, the external rotators are just not represented here because they're deep. Let's go ahead and do this. And now with the iliac region, I mentioned this before, psoas minor and major. Notice where they start from. Notice how they run down and they attach down here, down by the lesser trochanter, all right? So as they come down and they attach with and merge with iliacus, hip flexion puts a good amount of strain on the lumbar area of the back. So again, you might have to have a little bit of lumbar awareness, re-education for a client, but you also might have to work on some flexibility issues in psoas and iliopsoas because they're just tight up front. Or conversely, there's an imbalance posterior to anterior. What I did with this was I took the pictures from the book, I used their slides, and I tried to highlight which one we're looking at here. So glute max, glute max. You can kind of see where it originates and where it attaches. And you can notice how the fibers run, and you can get an idea of how it pulls on the femur. Glute med, right? So if you overlay these two, notice where this musculature originates from in here. Notice where glute med originates from, kind of on the crown there, right? On that lateral surface of the ilium, and where it attaches. It's slightly different attachments, different movement patterns. I did that for also glute mini and TFL. So glute mini, right? More on the ilium itself, just below the original, the glute med, and notice where he comes out and attaches more on a lateral aspect of the femur. TFL, all right, down along the side of the body, and when you look at this crown here, these kind of, I jokingly call them mouse ears in that tongue and groove format, you'll have inferior and superior iliac crest. You know, you'll have different ways to orient this, and we'll talk about this here in a second. But realize TFL runs from here along the aspect, lateral aspect of the femur, down, crosses the knee to the tibia. I make that point for a reason. So these guys are the deep six, right? And with the deep six, these guys, oftentimes when you talk about glutes, I'm going to work glutes, I'm going to work glutes. Usually your clients have no concept of what these are. And quite honestly, when you start working glutes, these are the first ones you should be working because they will aid in joint stability way before you can ever get into doing any kind of squat or lunge movement. So doing things like clamshells, heels together, or just plain side lie clamshells without the heels together. Band work, where you have bands around the ankles, also help with that. But these guys are big stabilizers, and they help to hold the joint together way before you get into glute med and glute max. 100%. These guys are almost completely forgotten and are hugely important. So the three compartments, anterior, medial, and posterior, I tried to break this out for you guys in these next couple of slides so it's a little bit easier to follow along. So you have rectus femoris, vastus medialis, vastus intermedialis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in the anterior compartment, you have these guys with the pink line. Hope you can see that. And then what I did was when we went into the posterior compartment, you got biceps femoris, long head, short head, semimembranosus, semitendinosus. You'll recall that from my massage therapist who didn't know what she was doing. And then when you go into the medial compartment, you can see adductor longus brevis, gracialis, and adductor magnus. I did that for your benefit. Hopefully it helps. The one that's not represented here, pectineus. Got it? Good. All right, guys. With that, I got about 5 minutes left. I think I'm going to go ahead and do a third video. I had intended video 1 to end here, but it just went over on the first one. All right, let me take care of this, and I'll see you in 1 second.